Hi everybody, I'm Tabitha and today we're talking about diversity. So this video, normally ahead of time what I do is I plan out, at least for the month, what I plan to talk about and when I'm going to talk about it. And this video was never planned necessarily. This is more a direct response to what is going on in America and worldwide, what we're seeing right now as far as the protests and the Black Lives Matter movement and all the other things that are going on in the world. And really, although I understand why sometimes it can be uncomfortable to talk about these kinds of things, especially if you feel like you're not in the minority that is being targeted or feeling like they need to speak up, I also feel like it's important for all of us who have channels or do these things to speak up and make sure that our side is clear. And let's be real, we've been silent long enough. So today, I'm going to talk about diversity, but I'm mostly talking about it in the lens of writing and reading diversity and why it's important for all of us to do that. So why do we need to have diversity in the books that we write and read? Really, that comes down to this. I want you to imagine that I asked you to take up a basic challenge. You were going to go into anywhere that had a lot of books available, a bookstore, a library, anywhere you want. And you were going to go in with other people, and you were going to find 10 books on the shelf that were either written by people who look like you or who had a major character who looked like you. Someone who basically at the most basic level was just like you. So the gender you identify with, the race you identify with. The challenge would be to find 10 books, and you would be timing yourself. Now for me, that would be really easy. I know a lot of books, and let's be real, I'm white, and I'm a woman, and I'm middle class. White middle-class women are the stars of an awful lot of books. That would be pretty fast for me. I could probably go to one section, pop 10 books off. I might even have to pull 12, but you can bet that I'd be able to find mine real fast. So imagine how long that would take a person of color, or a person who's disabled, or a person who's part of the LGBT community, or a person who's trans, and I realize it's the same, but it's more specific even than that. That would be harder. The more you taper this down, the harder it gets. So why does that matter? Because everybody deserves the right to open a book and read a book where they can see themselves in a character. And the more we remove those things, the harder it becomes. That's why diversity is important in what we read and what we write. So there's a lot of levels to writing diversity in your story. The first or the most basic would be all the stuff we just talked about. You want to make sure you include the characters or the different races that matter to the story you're trying to tell, and putting in those major characters as what they need to be to try to get that representation across. I read a lot of books by a lot of different authors, and they have a lot of different kinds of characters, and I do try to talk about it a little on this channel, but I encourage you to branch out. Try to make sure that you're not only reading books that are written by people who are the same gender and race as you. Branch out a little bit, try something different. It's really important. In fact, my local library, they're actually not my only local library, I have a lot. One of the libraries local to me has recently put out a list of books that you should be reading. They're calling them the anti-racism list, and I thought it was really cool. So I'm going to drop that in the comments in case you're looking for one. They're great books. Some of them are by people of color. Some of them are just dealing with those kinds of topics we should be looking at. But branch out and try to be a little more diverse and include that basic stuff. Why aren't we including characters that are different skin colors than us, or genders than us, or different sexual orientations than us? They belong in the books. They should be in the books that you're reading, and of course also the books that you're writing. That is something I will always advocate for. And if you know a book that I should be reading, that I should be checking out, make sure you let me know in the comments, and yeah, let me know why you are recommending that one. I also really quickly want to talk about the importance of including diversity of other things besides just the things we've already talked about. Now you notice I mentioned the other stuff first because I think it's incredibly important, but I also think it's important to go a little deeper, and I'm talking about diversity in the kind of people your characters are. I talk all the time on this channel about how I want to read books about people who are struggling with things. And I think it's really important to take struggles you're familiar with and struggles that you know and put them into your stories. And that includes struggles of feeling like you've dealt with systematic racism. I want to read about that. I want to read what that's like for you. But I also want to read about struggles with mental health and other things, because that's incredibly important diversity to put on blast for people to read about. We don't all live it, and I have a really privileged upbringing in a lot of that stuff, and I want to read about it so that I can empathize and understand. So one thing I can tell that's sort of relating to this, it's not on the same level, is, and I've talked about this before, the reason why I love The Secret Garden. So when I was in 5th grade, I think it was between 5th and 6th grade, we moved from the East Coast to Arizona, so like a 3,000-mile move. And any of you who have kids around this age, right, so 5th, 6th grade kids, you know what you're going to get from that kid, and I was that kid. You're going to get lots of attitude and anger and just general, like the kid's just upset and grumpy, not because they don't want to move, not because they don't support the family, not because they don't understand, but like that's where my life was. It's where my friends were. It's where my family was. And so moving 3,000 miles gave me this internal frustration and anger that I couldn't express. I didn't have the words. I didn't know what I was experiencing. And it hurt my parents when I did talk about it. So I kept it really bottled up. And it made me, I'm going to be real, I think I was a grumpy person for those, those couple of months. And I didn't like it. I didn't like feeling that anger and knowing that that wasn't me and I didn't want to be that angry, but I was, and I was snapping at people. And about that same time, I read The Secret Garden. And I've talked about this a little bit before. Mary Lennox was the first character that I had ever read who was that. She was bitter and she was angry and she was so like hurt by the world that she was like grumpy all the time. And I connected with that in a big way, in such a big way that I still list that as my favorite book because I connected with that. It was so real to me. She was angry and she didn't like who she was and she knew she was obstinate, but she didn't know what to do about it. And it wasn't until she met someone else that had that same attitude that she realized how unflattering that attitude was, right? How ridiculous that attitude was. She saw herself in him. And neither one of them liked it. Neither one of them liked dealing with someone else who was just like them. And for me, that was eye-opening to realize that I needed to recognize that I had that attitude, and then I needed to pay attention to how to fix that. So she finds things she enjoys, and being outside, being in the garden, and those kinds of things are the only thing that help her. And so that's where I started writing and writing poetry. I latched onto that. If it made me feel better, I needed to latch onto it and spend more time with it. And that's a lesson I learned from a book. So my point is not that I saw myself because I'm a white female in Mary, although she was too, but it was the internal stuff. It was what the character was struggling with, what the character was going through that I related to. So my point is, in your books, we need to include that. We need to include those realistic struggles for our characters that people will read and go, whoa, I get it. This is exactly what I feel. And for the first time, I feel like somebody's seeing me. So our diversity needs to have many levels. Yes, we need those basics. People with other skin color, people other religions, people of other sexual orientations, people of other genders. But we also need people who have realistic, real-life struggles that we might be going through that we can read about and learn from. So the other thing about diversity or relating to diversity that I felt like it was important to touch on today is that, and I've heard this argument before, that your characters don't outright have a race. And so that comes up a lot in the diversity arguments, that my characters don't have a race. No, it's not that my characters are all white. It's just that my characters, I don't tell you what all my characters are. And I feel like I'm a qualified person to talk about that because if you've ever read my Kingdom of Franz series, my Kingdom of Franz series takes place with a group of people who are between 2 and 3 inches tall, who are not of this world. Of this world, kind of. So in other words, they're on Earth, but they don't know that. So have they ever heard of these other plate, right? Africa, Spain, Mexico. They've never heard of them. They don't, Fran, that's it. That's all they've ever heard of, the Kingdom of Fran. And so I'm a good person to talk about that because I don't openly come right out and tell you, for example, that they're Latino because I can't. That doesn't exist. That's not something they would use. So do I have diversity? I mean, I could tell you yes. If I were to hire a professional artist and have a professional artist paint pictures of all of my characters, not all of them have white skin, but that's not the same as being from diverse countries, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to talk about Training Tutor, for example, for a minute, which is the third book in the Kingdom of Franz series. Training Tutor has 5 royals, just like all Kingdom of Thron books do. They have the 5 people, each in charge of the 5 realms. And I'm just going to talk about them all really quick, just if I were to give you skin color, which I don't really talk about much in the books. So the person who's in charge of the first realm, it's a male, and he would be as close as you can get to basically a white male. He's tall and he's thin and he's got light skin. And yeah, I mean, I was trying to think if he's always been the king, but no spoilers. So let's just leave it at that. The second realm, she is not. So if you went immediately to the second realm, she's a little bit shorter, but has dark skin. She's black. And that came out in the end, the first time she was introduced, because it was important for her character. And so I don't talk about it a lot, but she happens to be. She happens to be black. Then we have the king of the third realm, who is lighter skinned, but he wouldn't be white by our standards. Fourth realm is white, pretty much. But they're all very related. They come from the same line, which is why. So anyway, you can see that I do have some of them in there, but again, it's not a major focus of the story. So when we come to that argument of, what about if I just don't talk about it? So I have diversity, but I don't talk about it. I can say that happens to me as well. You can read into it however you want. You can read into it and say, whoa, wait a minute, but I pictured them all as white. And I'm probably going to point out that you're wrong in a couple of spots. And like I said, in Training Tutor, it became pretty obvious that queen of the second realm is not. And when it became important to the story, it was mentioned. But if it's important to us that our readers know that they're not all the same, you have to tell us. So on the one hand, do I back up your argument of saying, look, it's not that they're all white, I just didn't tell you what they were. I get it. I've done it, and I've been there, and I get it. But my argument is going to be that if it's important to you to be able to say it's diverse, you have to tell us. Period. So I don't like to describe all my characters from head to toe when they're first introduced. I'm not a fan of that. It's too much too much telling versus showing for me. I don't like to do it. I do give you a little bit that you need when you need it, but sometimes that's going to include making sure we're aware of their skin color. Are they a person of color or are they not? It's got to be important to their background. So in a fantasy story like mine, when we're not coming from this world, that's definitely difficult to deal with, but there's my stance on what it is. Do you always need to tell us? No, but you have to know that some readers are going to assume you have none. You have no diversity, and they were all white because you didn't tell us. So you have to just make sure if it was important to you, you tell us. I don't know. That's my stance on that. Feel free to tell me in the comments if you disagree, but that's where I stand. Anyway, so I know this is a rather short video today, and we talked about really important stuff, but didn't necessarily talk about a lot. So that's it. That's what I'm saying. I happen to be white, and yes, I'm a woman, but you know what? I'm an ally for anybody out there. I believe that everybody matters. Black lives matter. I believe trans rights matters. I believe we need to be allies for everybody else out there, even if I happen to be white and straight. That's my privilege, and I get it, and I acknowledge that. But I'm an ally and a voice and a follower and a fan of all of yours. And so if you are somebody from a minority group that has a book channel or an AuthorTube channel right here that I should be following, I encourage you to please drop your link down in the comments. Make sure you tell us all about it so that we can go check out your channels and make sure we're showing you support and love, because your channels and your voices and your opinions, they matter. And you know what? I'm listening, and everybody else is listening right now. Now's the time for us to be listening to you. Drop a comment to let me know you're still here. Hit subscribe and tap that little bell so you know when I'm back. Keep plotting the path to your own dreams, and I will see you next time. Bye!